Ladies and gentlemen, we have detected gravitational waves. We did it.
Newton's theory of gravity explained almost everything in the solar system. But when Einstein did special relativity, he began to invent a new theory of gravity, and that's called the general theory of relativity. And as soon as you have that theory, it turns out you also have something called gravitational waves. They are distortions of space and time that move with the velocity of light, let's say toward you. They stretch space, let's say this way, while simultaneously compressing space that way. It's a tiny little infinitesimal stretching and compression, about 1,000th the size of the nucleus of an atom. That's the kind of motion we have to measure.
I went as a student to a summer school on physics in the French Alps. Joe Weber lectured about gravitational waves there. He was inspiring in all my interactions with him. I just found him a pleasure to be with and a good friend. Joe was the first person to have the foresight and the guts to start to develop gravitational wave detectors.
That was a brilliant idea. He's a hero for that reason. And he was full of things like that. First-class inventions, molecular physics that he was working on, and the idea of making a maser or a laser.
He had an intuition about what was important, and he went after it. Today we look back on him as truly the father of the field.
Nobody had dreamed it would be possible to do this. Joe was sure that there was something to find, and he gradually developed a technology that looked like it might possibly succeed. He was quite decently funded for quite a while.
He was on top of the world in those early days.
I actually first met Joe in a personal sense. He wrote to me, said he was coming to Southern California to give an endowed lecture at USC, and would I have dinner with him afterwards. 3 weekends later, we got married. He always said he had no trouble making up his mind.
Professor Joseph Weber had published papers saying that with such a detector, his was several tons, you could detect gravity waves, and he did, he claimed, detect gravity waves, like 10 a day. We were skeptical. I went to visit Joe Weber and tried to persuade him to do things a little more carefully.
By 1970, Weber's experiments weren't succeeding. I mean, the physics was just not right.
He was not a good experimenter. All of the result is in estimate for which he had no basis.
You've got to be extremely careful to be sure that you've checked every bloody thing that you're working on with. Darwin did an experiment which I consider far superior to the experiment done by Weber, and he found nothing. And it became quite contentious. I didn't know what to believe, to be honest with you. I had trouble explaining Weber's experiment to the students.
Joe was in many ways a very friendly, outgoing, easygoing person. Of the community, Darwin was certainly the person he liked least. Darwin was involved in building similar but not identical bars. He was, I think, the most hostile.
Darwin was aggressive. The other people in the field who attempted to replicate Joe were much more amicable.
Certainly there were arguments with him on a stage with Weber. He effectively accused Weber of being pathological in the way he was describing his science, because he came up with all these different ways of showing that the Weber experiments were wrong. Darwin wasn't being malicious. He felt that he was a representative of science, and he wanted to make sure that people didn't think that it was right. He almost single-handedly got rid of a stratospheric transport, which was the Concorde. He fought against that, and he said this is going to ruin the stratosphere. Later on, killed Star Wars because it was a bad idea.
I've met him only once. I sat next to him at dinner one time. I found him neither terribly evil nor terribly impressive. But Kip's always said that Richard Darwin is the smartest person he ever met.
At IBM, my colleague Jim Levine and I, in the early 1970s, had built detectors of gravity waves. I went to the Fifth Relativistic Astrophysics Conference in 1975, and Joe Weber and Dave Douglas at the University of Rochester, and they were sitting in the front row, and I said, look, here's your problem, as I've told you privately, and I'm going to get up and tell this conference that this is all nonsense, and here's why, and here's our simulation. But I'd rather you did it, but neither one of them would do it, so I got up and I gave this paper.
And Weber's defense was, you didn't see anything because you didn't do it the way I do it. And that's not a defense that a good scientist should use. It really was ugly to watch.
Joe was really convinced that his approach was going to succeed, and we were much more skeptical. In fact, I'm quite sure that his analysis of his own detector was incorrect, and this is where our disagreement was. I regretted that I couldn't convince him that he was wrong. He regretted he couldn't convince me that I was wrong. That's a rather different disagreement from other experimenters who weren't able to replicate what he was saying.
More and more people started dumping on him. The community decided he was wrong, and he tried valiantly to say that there is an interesting phenomenon here, let's at least explore it. And slowly but surely the community was not willing to do that. So once LIGO got started, they simply had to cut off Joe's funding.
Joe pioneered the techniques, some of which have been carried over into LIGO. He was very focused on resonant bar detectors and had no interest to get into interferometers.
Dick Darwin played this really important role that we got this committee of Nobel Prize winners. That gave it a certain credibility. And we lobbied Congress. The project got funding, and that's then the real beginning of LIGO. And that happened in 1994.
The National Science Foundation put ultimately $1 billion into these laser interferometer gravity wave observatories.
Ray Weiss felt great Jewish guilt over the fact that we had convinced NSF and through them Congress to spend $1 billion on this.
Joe never doubted that gravitational radiation existed and carries energy.
I think he believed that he was seeing things nobody else was. I don't think he could express what it was that was different about what he was doing than what everybody else was doing. And I thought that he had gone off the deep end, to be honest with you.
7 cities sought the Homer dead, through which the living Homer begged his bread. I'm sorry that Joe wasn't here. I know what he would have said. He would have said if they developed both technologies in parallel, it would have happened sooner. Joe maintained the bar detectors till the day he died. The last data tape ran out about a week after he died.
Nobody detected a gravity wave until LIGO revealed its results in March 2016.
Here was this theory that was developed in 1915, and all of a sudden we saw that it worked in the gravitational field of 2 black holes. And to me, that was an unbelievable check on something that was made up, all in good old Einstein's head.
This was the triumph, the end game. It was the ultimate prize that was shared by everybody who had worked in the field, everybody who had influenced it, and Joe was a big part of that. And the younger generation who really pulled it off in the laboratory, I think they were euphoric.
400 years ago, Galileo turned a telescope to the sky and opened the era of modern observational astronomy. I think we're doing something equally important here today. I think we're opening a window on the universe, the window of gravitational wave astronomy.
IBM Studios is interesting because it's a collection of a lot of creative people, and they spend their days doing creative stuff with purpose for other people because it's their jobs. And this is kind of the opposite of that, right? You're not doing anything for anyone. You're coming here to just make some art, either decompress, put your mind elsewhere, be creative in different ways. And I think it makes people more creative in general when they have no structure to what they're doing.
It just came out that way. I appreciated it.
Saxon Island?
Oh my god.
Yeah. Yep.
It's a nice way to connect with people you might not work with directly. So we've met some pretty amazing people who come here, and really talented people as well. You wouldn't even know that.
Checking your pen.
More or less, it's an open invite to everybody. We have people from different parts of the business, different floors come, but I'd say there's a pretty core group of people. We try and do it most weeks. We put Bob Ross on the TV and put some jazz on, and totally unstructured. Yeah. It's refreshing.
Everybody called me godless when I was a kid. Hey, godless. I was looking for new things that people were not looking for. If I was looking to sell a picture, I would have taken a picture that people were looking to buy. I was looking to take a picture that was different. The whole thing of photography really fascinated me. At some point I thought, do I want to be a filmmaker or do I want to be a photographer? But I really was more fascinated with the stopping of time. There's some temporality of everything, whether it's the store across the street, the people you know that are not here anymore. That's what I go for. I go to take pictures of things that are going to disappear. I came to New York to shoot street photos and look for work in '76. I'd walk down the streets and shoot pictures of people. In my mind, there was a thing going on. How do I set the f-stop and shutter speed for the shady side of the street? And how do I set it for the sunny side of the street? Like you saw a picture coming, you see, oh, that's a cool looking guy. He'll be standing in the shade, 60th at 8, 125 at 5.6. Set the focus over here, and you're ready. And that's the thing that's running through your mind, and that is almost very calming. You don't really have to think, but you're just doing that constantly. It was my analog mind. I don't as much have to do that with digital. I thought of street photography as being done during the day on the streets of New York. And then when I went down to CBGB's for the first time and started getting the idea that maybe I should shoot pictures down there, I realized, I'm the only one who can figure out how to shoot in here without a flash. You're shooting under low light, so we have to try either a longer exposure, which I'm not capable of, or develop the stuff differently. It was kind of a mad scientist experiment because I broke the rules a bit, but didn't break them so much that the film wasn't readable. I ended up with this style that kind of, the pictures glow off the page in a way, and people didn't have to turn lights on to see them. They could see them the same way in the red club light, the way I could see them in a darkroom red light. The only time I would really shoot a lot at CBGB's was like if the Ramones came on. The music got faster, and they moved so great on stage that it was like not boring, that I would go like, wow, I gotta shoot. I could definitely go out and knock off 4 rolls of film. I seemed like the guy who was overeating. I had a midlife photography crisis. Towards the end of my analog years, I was in my 40s. I would have tons of rolls of film to develop, and I'd go like, oh, I just don't want to develop film anymore. I keep taking pictures, and then I've got to develop them, and then I start to develop them. Is it ever going to end? And I had like an existential moment where I went, I just can't do it anymore. I was actually at my therapist. She said to me, you're having problems processing things. You don't want to go into a dark room, and you have a lot of negatives. And I said, yeah, that's about it. Photography is such a strange medium, and the way I learned it was analog. It didn't seem slow or anything when I learned it. It seemed like the only way you can actually get pictures. And then when digital came along, it just sort of crept around the edges. But once I started, then I went full force. You adapt to the tool. You can see it right away. So you go like, well, I'll try this. You can see how it works out, and then you very quickly try it again. And that changes the way your brain thinks about things. Now I've got 1 million digital images because you shoot so much. Every set of hard drives has to be backed up 1,000,000 times because they don't exist. It just doesn't feel as real. Conceptually, it never feels as secure. There's been a lot of good things in digital that I enjoy. There's certain things digital can do that you couldn't do before. Now the whole world is photo crazy because a lot of people take pictures. That whole self-portrait thing, which has become the selfie, people can look at the picture while they're taking it. It breaks all the rules. That's a big difference from the days of analog where you don't know the picture until the next day. Taking pictures changes the way I experience the world. You want the most important thing about how to take a good picture? It's where you stand. If the picture's not good enough, you're not close enough.
There's a dimension of IBM which is always looking at, it's not everything we do, but it's a continuing and important component of what we do to keep pushing the frontiers of analysis and of computing capacity and uncover meaningful patterns. A lot of people, when they talk about big data and analytics, they immediately jump to the frame, what is essentially, the kind of needle in the haystack metaphor, that what this is about is finding that key fact, that key insight amidst an unmanageable tsunami of other data points. And yes, that's part of it. But that's not the most interesting part of it. The most interesting part of it isn't finding the needle in the haystack. The most interesting part of it is understanding the haystack. It's another way to put it is, it's not just about finding the answer to the question you knew how to ask going in. It's about finding the answers to questions you didn't know to ask in the first place. And you only get to know to ask them when you can begin to see patterns in what looks like chaos.